Hello.
Hi, Martin. I'm going to turn up my volume. I'm either getting old or you guys are speaking softly in the early morning. Hi, Martin. I'm going to
Hello.
turn up my volume. I'm either getting. Sorry, that echoed just because I had the YouTube. I turned off the echo. So put this up again. Make this small. Uh, I think this can be seen, right? Let's see.
Yes,
It might be easier. And I can turn my. See myself. A selfie and seeing yourself and identifying yourself. Scary stuff.
it's not as scary for me because I'm not really quite sure what I look like.
It's that being from a culture with big noses. I remember recording on cassette tapes in the 70s. To me, on a cassette tape, I sound like I have much more nasal. My kids can tell me why. They're in music. In fact, the older one wants to produce music. So the exact sound and the physics behind that sound is something that he strives for. You don't want everybody to sound like Bob Dylan, another big nosed guy. Should be able to see. I should mess with settings. I thought there was a way to get this over on the side. Okay, there we go. That's better. So just to say, I now have a back to back with this, so I'll cut it at 9. I think give people a couple of minutes. To me, it's 7:59 a.m. So so Dimitri, again, thanks for the nice discussion last week about model governance. I unearthed a 2005 document from FDIC. I mentioned that a little bit down here. Now that the meeting is kind of past 8 o'clock, I'll just say, I think I'd like to spend a couple of minutes just if you had follow-up or other people might have looked at the recording about what we talked about last week and then go into the main part of the meeting. But I'm curious, just like I was with metal validation in general, if there are guides like that. This is the FDIC in 2005 saying examiners should look for these elements of governance, uh, essentially control and oversight. And then the third thread was in the traditional model validation, but it's really the oversight and control functions that chapter in the book talks about. But let me do one more minute, and then I'll just go through the agenda. As
Do
far as
you
the part, yeah, go ahead, Martin. Sorry.
do you have any measure of how many people are viewing the video or audio afterwards?
Yeah, on the YouTube channel, it'll say, I think, who viewed it, and then some people actually subscribe to the channel. So at one
So
point, one of those two numbers was 20 something, I think, on the second meeting. Hopefully, like a Fibonacci number, hopefully this is something that's increasing over time. As, I mean that it integrates out. If the people like it, then they continue to be on it, and then there's a new layer and so on. So. All right, let's do 802. So let me go through my little agenda here. I'll go back to immersive mode, or what is it called? Focus mode. So, right. So I'd like to start just a few minutes after 8, and I have the 9 o'clock. But you know, since there's a recording on YouTube, and since there's traffic about this that I put up on LinkedIn, you know, let's continue the discussion if we can, even after the physical meeting ends. Just a couple of bookkeeping notes that my co-author Martin and my co-author Chandrakant is compiling, has started compiling minutes. I saw one copy of that, so it's like I think 4 or 5 page document which goes through one of our meetings and says the topics that were discussed and a bit more detail on that. I'm trying to find the best place to put that. I'll probably put it on my corporate website. But since that's under construction, I'm not gonna put up a link until everything is done. Also, I think within YouTube that it's possible to add a clickable table of contents to the actual video so that you could get to a timing. You could say, Martin Goldberg said at 8:03 this, so can I get to that topic? It would be, you know, you have to be judicious as far as what you put in a table of contents, obviously, but if there were 6 or 10, you know, moments in the meeting, it's easier to go around like that than it is to listen to the whole thing. So go back to this mode so I can see people. All right, so what I propose today is to talk for a few minutes, just reviewing some things that Dimitri and I spoke about at meeting number 4 last week. Generally, it was a subject of model governance and control, which you know, some people have omitted from when they talk about model validation, even though, as we said, it's really kind of an overlay or it's the supervisory internal part of it, that it may help to unify the model developers, the model users, and the model validators, and make sure that everything is going on, that everybody's on the same page.
There,
Go ahead. Yeah.
there are one of the differences between the way, or at least at all the places I've worked, model governance doesn't have that demand for independence quite as much as model validation, and they tend to work with the businesses more, and also that because it's a control function, just like any other control function, senior management is more comfortable with them because a lot of senior management is sort of very uncomfortable with quants. They don't think they're quite human, don't get them. Right. And so there are places where the quants are seen as subservient to model governance. There are places where model governance is seen as not even quants and subservient to the quants. And there's other places where they're put on an equal footing, but there's always a political tension there, at least for the past 10, 15 years, they've been separate organizations, usually reporting to the same person, but there's a model governance group separate from the model validation group, and they have sort of different ways of doing things. The model governance group does things a lot like any other sort of risk management group would do, and they don't have the requirement to be as technical.
Right.
And a lot of times the people they hire for it couldn't be that technical. That, you know, they're English majors and art history majors type things.
Right. I mean, the person, my contact, this woman at PNC Bank, was the one who really said she felt that the model governance aspect was missing, at least when she's reviewed the draft of the table of contents. I didn't give her any text, but my thought was to take that model governance chapter that I showed you in Chandrakant last night, and maybe by the end of the month, send that out for review to her. But yeah, I think it's like the difference between a model validator saying that for quantitative reasons, we're putting limited trading authority on this model, whereas governance would just say, okay, we're shutting this whole thing down just because senior management's told us we don't make any money selling widgets, or there's something fundamentally wrong here. Less quantitative, more kind of controlled. So any other comments on model? What I was getting to is that even though SR 11.7 is more current, obviously, to 2011 than this FDIC guidance, I thought it was interesting that they wrote a whole document about model governance for examiners. And if there are other ones like that, globally or not, it would be interesting to source those.
I think there was some piece of well, I'll dig around and see if I can find something, because I think there was something from like 5 years ago that was specifically on model governance from a European regulator, but I'll see if I can find it. I might be remembering wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say the two things I picked up from reading FDIC that I felt were not, at least in this model governance chapter yet, were the change control process, which is something Dimitri and I talked about last week. People putting in, as we said last night, you and I, Mark, these hidden things like a cap that and not documenting it. And the other one is the data integrity itself. We'll get to later the Basel view of AI, but in AI, the stakes on data seem to be a lot higher.
There's also the issue that of versioning and version control that with AI you can't do that because it's constantly self-training, and it's not deterministic, so the results you get today are not the same as the results you get tomorrow, just because it's, well, part of it is randomization, and part of it is that the results you get tomorrow are informed by the results you got today.
Right. And if the model is overfit to begin with, I guess that's like a collinearity in a simple linear regression model, then I understand you can fit the data today well, but it's probably not going to be very stable.
Hi, Martin. This is Chandrakant here. Actually, regarding version control, now they have developed models which you can freeze in time. Like I'm more aware about the open source system like Ollama, that you can download the Ollama. It's basically an open source large language model. You can download the model and you can use it offline. And yeah, and it will be something which you have kind of freezed in time. So there are possibilities of version control and controlling the models, what they learn. So that aspect is now there.
All right, that sounds like kind of an integration by parts that you can keep, or I'm sorry, like variance reduction in Monte Carlo, that you can make part of the problem deterministic and freeze it and reduce the randomness. So that sounds helpful.
Yeah.
Chandrakant, yeah, why don't we, I'll stop the share here, so I'll give you the ability to share if you want, but what I was saying that today I'd like to cover first, if we can talk a little bit about topic one here, the types of things that there are some tasks like anti-money laundering and fraud and other things that you've pointed out may be best done by AI, sometimes by proprietary and sometimes by third party. So I think that's a topic in itself. And then if there's time at the end, then I'll talk a little about the Basel paper. The Basel paper itself, by the way, is extremely well written about AI in central banks. And there's even a video, and the guy, Hyun Sung Shin, who writes it, is very articulate. I wanted to look up his bio. I guess I can cheat and look up his bio while you're talking. But let me stop the share. So give you the ability if you want to, or if you're just audio, that's fine too. But why don't
No,
you?
I'm actually on phone. Actually,
That's what
I'm
I
on a
mean. Yeah.
phone.
So go ahead. Yeah, do your spiel or do your yeah. Good. The floor is yours. Chandrakant is Martin and I. He's the third of our three of us three authors on the textbook on model risk, and has done quite a bit on the artificial intelligence role in model risk management. So please
So
take
actually, I read that paper. I read that paper and very impressed with the Aurora project they are going into, and but that is basically currently in the testing phase where they're trying to integrate multiple banks' data, which is definitely not a new concept that has been taught around many countries. Usually, like Netherlands has that approach. Again, that is also still in the nascent stage.
No, we
where
can
they're trying
talk
to
about.
try.
Yeah, just to clarify that. So you're talking about one of the BCBS or Basel projects within
Yes.
AI. There's a chart in the paper on that I'll either discuss or I'll tell you what it is if I don't get to it. So they list about 10 different projects across jurisdictions that they're working on. Aurora is one of them. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, at this point, it is at the nascent stage. The whole challenge within the AI, in this implementation is triangulation of all the bank's data. That is the primary target of all these initiatives which are again not related to AI or large language models, because this is a separate compliance issue, that how they can make the sources of data available, and all these steps are one step before, so that the LLMs can be more effective in those domains. Now, overall, actually discusses about that, okay, LLMs are effective, and this will make LLMs effective around corresponding banking domains as well, where the corresponding banking is on the decrease, because banks do not want to get into the compliance challenges which these products pose. And so there is a strong business reason, economic reason that is driving this project of integration of banks' data, which though are currently the nascent stage, but there is a high hope that it will work out well in the future.
Yeah, just putting the table up, but please continue. Yeah, and I think we should probably pivot to the use of AI within banks, but I'll put the chart up which shows Aurora.
Also, what I feel is that given even the generative AI, whatever I have experimented, that many of the processes, this generative large language models can automate in the AML domain, at least from the investigative part of it. If you give a simple, you can clearly experiment with some of the examples that to any large language model, if you give a name of an SDN listed person and change his age and address, the large language model by default will tell you that it is not the AS and this SDN listed person. So that aspects are actually not currently being used, but there are possibilities in future that these anti-money laundering, many of this OFAC sanctions investigation part will get automated, or large language models will be heavily leveraged in analyzing those investigations. That's all from my side at the moment.
Okay, well, why don't you, or maybe I can just go back and just say a little bit about what I believe is in the book right now, which is that, so there's a section on anti-money laundering, on fraud, on sanctions, on things to do with the Bank Secrecy Act and some of the other global standards. So that within that, if I understand it correctly, Chandrakant, that The banks want to use AI because they feel that's more, well, I guess partly it's that if you're looking at a bunch of transactions, that seems to be something like in the flavor of this table here, where it's a very tedious process to try to find something that might be fraud or suspect. So that seems like the AI as a bot idea. So let's say as a validator or as a student of validation that you're a junior quant, you go into a bank, if you're in the anti-money laundering area, what do you see? Do you see mainly, do you think proprietary software? Do you see mainly third party? And how do you use that? And what kind of costs and benefits, pluses and minuses are there to using AI to do that?
See, this is beyond, without doubt, that at least for mid-size banks and small banks, proprietary softwares are way to go, because maintaining and enhancing this AI, this large language models requires huge data infrastructure, which needs to constantly upgrade. Once these data structure, and this is actually one of the key industry challenges, that these the vendors of these systems are very concentrated, but that's a separate discussion. So for at least for mid-sized banks and smaller banks, use of vendor systems are the way to go, because that way they are not responsible for updating the software and making it current, and also in case there are any situations where they don't see the results as expected, they don't need to have expertise. They just can directly talk to the vendor to fix those issues, because these softwares don't just need amount of data available in the web, but also they need some proprietary data sources, which if individually acquired by the banks, it will be too expensive and it won't be a very optimal solution for their business processes.
So a quick question on data then, because like I think Martin and I have both worked a bit on operational risk. So for example, around 2011, 2012 or so, I was working at Morgan Stanley on this. And to run the operational risk models, we couldn't simply use the bank's own data, but we had to kind of crowdsource that there was a consortium of anonymized data across the banks, let's say across 50, 100 banks. Is there, when you're talking about data to run the AML model, so now we have the software issue and the data issue. So for things like calibration and perhaps also for the training and the testing aspect, is the data typically wholly within the banks, like history of transactions, or are there some cases where you're looking at kind of an anonymized and across that? And do they, if they buy software, do they then have to go around? I think you said a minute ago, they try to use their own data whenever possible. But are there cases where you buy a big data set or from a consortium? Just if you could talk to that a little bit.
Sure. See, any investigation or any analysis you do want to do about the customer, it is based on the activity that customer did within your banking platform. So first thing is the key data which you have is your customer's data, his behavior. So that is your data, which is totally independent from the data outside. Now, as a bank, you only have visibility of about the customer information that he has provided through KYC processes and his banking behavior that he has done with you. Now, based on that, there are two ways. Like currently, you can only analyze his behavior based on what his activity he has done with your bank. But you do not have visibility what he did with other banks. So he did some activity in your bank that doesn't constitute, that looks like money laundering, and it is not even, it may not even have triggered any alerts as well. But then when that information look into the entirety with combination of other data, which is you do not see, that may constitute a money laundering activity. So banks, when they have individual capacity within their own system, they do not have that capability to triangulate that process. But yeah, given that all these consortiums are forming, they will have better visibility and better judgment on the customer's behavior. But I'm not sure if the actual customer activity will be flagged by the bank, by these systems, by sharing the outside the bank activity, but rather they will say that, yeah, okay, we see this activity here and it triangulates for some other activity we see somewhere else. So we would like to
It's
flag this customer.
it's quite likely that if there is a consortium, that it will be, as Jonathan said, anonymized, so that although you
Yes.
can see the sorts of customers who do that sort of thing, you will almost certainly not be able to trace a particular customer across different banks because of the anonymization, and you would probably get in an enormous amount of trouble with many regulators if you didn't have that anonymity.
Yeah, agreed. See, that anonymity will be with you, for you. But when it is handled by other system, which is a third party software, that system may not have that anonymity, and it has the luxury of knowing about the customer, though it won't disclose that particular activity. So based on that, they can give you a flag that, okay, we think that this is a money laundering activity. So there will be situations where you have, based on your current data, you are not able to tell that this customer is doing any money laundering, but just because system said it, so we have to take that as a source of truth that, okay, we, as per our data, this doesn't appear, but because system has said it, so we are flagging this customer. And then, yeah, there needs to be policies developed where they have to do the needful actions based on these overall criteria. Make sense, Martin?
Yeah, that's interesting, because now you're saying you're going to do something basically to punish a customer, but you don't know why. You just know that some external trusted third source has said they're doing something wrong. We can't tell you why, but they are. And just trust
Exactly.
us.
That may,
Right.
yeah, that may be a situation, and though I cannot predict that's a definite possibility. But with this, all the consortium, this is actually the way it appears to be going.
Well, what about
because they have to protect that anonymity as well, that, okay, and they cannot disclose because of this customer privacy. And we don't know how the rules will change around that, because again, there are still the laws of like 314D where banks can voluntarily share the customer information, but again, that is totally voluntary, and they have to follow certain compliance there as well.
Sorry. What about that in the process of anonymization, they could somehow filter out things and mess up some patterns, or even change the data by accident? I mean, once you know, there's a good way to do anonymization, and then there's a bad way. You might actually bias the data. I think that's the one that you wouldn't see. And of course, it can be security breaches. I mean, that's just upping the game in terms of data integrity. That, as I said, the FDIC is something that says that their examiners look for that.
Because I know that in my personal life, I've had transactions. I tried to buy something overseas using a Visa card, and it got declined. And I called the bank, and they said, we didn't decline it. And it turns out Visa declined it before it ever got to the bank, because Visa didn't trust the country where that business was in. And they just always decline every transaction to that country. With the country being Vanuatu, by the way.
Oh, well,
Right. You want to take something closer to home. I was closing on this house, and the title company had a guy with a Latino last name, like Martinez or Rodriguez. And because his first name, so you know, like the name Ricardo Rodriguez is like John Smith in Latin America, so maybe that was his name. But he was on a terrorist list because it's like there's probably 1 million Rodriguez's in the world. So they literally held up the closing. Chase did, because of the name match. You know, it's like the whole 9/11 hijackers that if your name is, you know, so-and-so in some Muslim traditions, you may have 100 other people with that name or 1,000.
My sister-in-law had that problem that her name, Diana Dambra, is not a common name. There's only two of them in the US. The other Diana Dambra has a rap sheet as long as your arm. And so the Diana, who's my sister-in-law, occasionally gets flagged for a lot of things because
Right.
they run her name and they see, oh, you live in New Jersey. They're like 15 felonies by a Diana Dambra in New Jersey.
Right. There's a Yiddish, I think it's a Yiddishism, but anyway, it came into English that you say, with friends like that, who needs enemies? You know, you have not a good sample. Go ahead, Dimitri. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to sort of point out. So when you have these, BSA AML models used by banks, even very large banks, these days it's more often than not a vendor model. So from validation standpoint, it's important to see that it's kind of wrapped correctly, implemented correctly in bank systems, right? But the way these things are used. So let's say the model sees that a certain transaction matches a pattern which is suspicious, and it could be money laundering, it could be human trafficking. They actually have patterns for that these days. So one of three things will may happen really. Well, first of all, the transaction gets kicked out. So what may happen is the bank is basically instructed to talk to the customer and get more information, right? And that's kind of a pretty common outcome. So they'll call up the customer and say, hey, can you please take a selfie with your passport or something along those lines, right? Another possibility is that the transaction will be just flatly declined. And that actually isn't so well, like Martin describes. And these days it's kind of less common because it upsets customers. And the third possibility that we haven't mentioned is that the customer is told nothing, but there is a SAR sent to the authorities, suspicious activity report, and in fact, kind of various laws and regulations prohibit the bank from telling the customer that there was a SAR, right? So and that's actually pretty common, and the customers don't know about it, so they're not unhappy. But yeah, that's a fairly common outcome of these kind of false positives from models. Okay, that's all.
Thanks. Yes, that's helpful. Back to you, Trondikant. Maybe we go on for a few minutes and then I wanted to have some time for the Basel as well. I think you said you had to drop off around now anyway. So do you want to have a final word or two, Chandrakant?
No, actually, but just I want to tell you from model validation side, I see that the use of vendor model will only increase in the domain of financial crimes, because going forward, the trend is that to look in any customer activity from a holistic point of view.
Yeah, just my editorial comment is I did look before interviewing for an AML job about third-party AI used for things like the financial crime. And it seems like there's a million different flavors of it out there. So it's not something where there's a kind of, McDonald's and Burger King that they're really, I didn't really understand why there were so many different ones, except that we don't know very much about being able to filter or sort and get the best one that we need. So that seemed to be problematic. Okay, I think that was, what did they say? There's certain points in an hour where conversation stops. All right, so thanks, Chandrakant. We can follow up with that if people want to reach out to him or to me online. Let me go back let me now move to this recent Basel paper, which is kind of a, you know, a wake-up headline here. Again, their idea is, and that's why I put it with a kind of a chemical reaction or with two greater than signs. It's the interaction between central banks and AI, both from the standpoint of supervising banks, meaning private banks, who are doing AI, and also are there certain things that they can do? The central banks are more concerned with things like, you know, economic trends and things like that, like the Fed's task to have full employment, but also to keep inflation low. So in their view, you know, if the central banks have not already adopted it, then they should embrace it now. Right. So that's one point. The third point, which we talked about with data, is there. And again, the trade-off between the benefits and risks of AI. So this is just a press release. There's a full-on video about this, which is here at the, what's that reference here? There's data behind the graphs. They did a lot with this that I thought was good. And it's a bit of a long paper and sort of written by a committee, so there's a lot of things in it. I just wanted to highlight, at least for a few minutes, what I thought were the important charts in here. So this is the history of AI, not that important to this discussion. But there were maybe 3 or 4 that were a bit better. How AI works, you know, development from things like natural language processing and so on. With all these words, it sort of looks like a couple of politicians running for president and showing that they can repeat a list of words, but that's a joke for another space. I also thought it was kind of interesting that the sectors that they identified, none of these is really investment banking per se, where SR 11.7 I immediately think of as being a big bank, but you know, they regulate everyone. And certainly within lending and credit risk, that's something that's important for banks. But it talks about some of the things we already talked about, explainability issues, third-party dependence. I don't know. I've heard hallucinations. What is that? I think, Martin, maybe to ask you or others, is that just that AI comes with something that's like a psychotic?
No,
yeah.
the AI doesn't know what anything is. It doesn't think. It draws analogies and it tries to predict what the next word would be given the words that came before. So occasionally it can come up with something that it can tell you with absolute certainty that the sky is orange.
Right.
And there's the way it's constructed, there's probably no way to stop it from having the occasional hallucination. That it's like if you tell an AI engine, draw a picture of a room with absolutely no elephants in it, it sees the word elephant and sees the word draw and sees the word room. And remember, it's stochastic. So if you ask the same question 10 times, 2 or 3 of them will have elephants in it. Because it doesn't actually know what you're saying. It's just a word to vector embedding, and it sort of has an idea of the order of words matters, but it's not good at it. And with the current transformer architecture, they don't really know how to fix this problem.
Right. I remember when I went to study math as a junior high school student, maybe 11, 10 years old, they were talking about set theory. So it sounds like it doesn't really know the fact that the population of elephants in this problem is the null set. It doesn't have the absolute.
No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't know anything.
Right.
It seems to, because it has this huge database of when someone says one word, it tends to be followed by the next word, or when someone draws this kind of an image, it tends to have this sort of brush strokes, and they can put that together, but occasionally do it wrong.
Yeah, no, that's well said. There seem to be some other warning signs here. I think herding here under financial stability might be, what is it, like when everybody's in the same trade on Wall Street. And oh, that's nice. I don't know how I did that, but it should be easier to read. But here's herding under financial stability challenges across all these different sectors.
Especially if everyone's using the same third-party
Vendor,
AI.
right. So there may not be,
or if all the third-party AIs were trained on the same corpus.
right. So maybe there's an argument for buying a few different AI third-party software. Yeah, so I don't know.
And they do sell ones untrained where you can train it yourself on your data.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I see. I clicked on it. All right. Yeah, there were a couple of others. So we do get time. Okay, only 8:40. Let me just continue for a few minutes here. Then they go into specifically, this is the payment section and some other ones, but I couldn't exactly get that. How the public reacts to AI is that chart. What type of things are there? Because Chandrakant, I think the discussion was mainly about LLMs, but but there are other things within that. And one of the things that part of the book that Chandrakant wrote is that the first thing that banks tried to do with AML BSA stuff is just to develop rules. And that's like the $10,000, the one that you have to do a report, and a SAR, suspicious activity report that Dimitri brought up, is purely rule based. I think it's also been $10,000 since the Nixon administration when the BSA came out. So that certainly should be something that should be looked at from time to time. Maybe the trigger is just much too low.
Well, the problem is with these rule-based ones, if you implement every single rule they offer, then every single transaction will be flagged. And so
Right.
you get to configure your implementation of it and decide which of those thousands of rules you want to ignore.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's actually a little bit more nuanced, because you could have you could train your AI on a big data set of transactions and say, okay, this pattern looks suspicious. So, for example, if someone is sending $9,000 in a bunch of separate transactions, maybe it looks like structuring. People are trying to avoid the $10,000 limit, right?
Layering. Is that layering,
Yeah.
just piling things on top of each other? Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it's a bit more nuanced. So people send SARs, based on patterns which don't technically violate any single rule, but they use this training. Yeah, but the point kind of just going back to these hallucinations. Yeah, a lot of times in practice, you see these things basically hallucinating in a sense and saying, this looks like a suspicious activity, and then it's a part of doing business. You have some low-level employee look at it and say, this is not really suspicious, and then you feed it back to your AI and you add training to it. So the next day you see this pattern. This doesn't happen. Yeah. So I think like when we started seeing this BSA-ML models, they were more rule-based, maybe some years ago, and these days I think there's a much more emphasis on basically pattern recognition.
Right.
It's a bit like, I don't know if anybody remembers my 1988 paper on Liang's stuff. No?
Right.
Well, it's kind of, you start with rules and then you train and train and train, and you end up with more transactions being kicked out based on patterns than on strict rules eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I'd point out, maybe you can read the x-axis label here, but this is showing these are the most effective, most efficacious, and these are the least. So rule-based models, I'm not exactly sure what these three colors mean, but generally speaking, they're only getting you 20% of the time are they finding the actual money, that there is a money laundering going on. Whereas this one has the capability to do it, it looks like 80%, 70, 80% of the time. So clearly there is a difference. At least in this data set. Let's see, how do maybe just one or two more points here. This is just the mechanics of the different pieces. I think this is about it. This is how people feel about AI for cybersecurity. And then this one I put up before, but I guess it's good to end this paper on this. That BIS itself has, what is it? Looks like 8 different programs, named programs now across different jurisdictions. That would be the second row. Like this just in the Nordic countries, this just in Switzerland. That's not surprising, right? There are some things where Switzerland is in a class by itself. They can't beat France in soccer, but at least, they do some other things well. Right, and then the different, I certainly know what NLP and LLM are. I don't know what these two are. I guess the L is probably language. Oh, here they are. Supervised machine learning and unsupervised machine learning. Okay. Someone's got is that me? A clicking sound. And then they talk finally about more like what they would do as a central bank. For example, I thought there was something talking about the kind of things that you could do. And finally, the labor market, how is AI going to, destroy things? Here's a story. So in Berkeley, my advisor and I were looking around in the 80s when I was doing my PhD dissertation. And he said, there are a lot of professors here that are dead wood. He named one or two that they were known for teaching courses, but that they hadn't really done research that was valuable in 20 years. So I think what we concluded was that in physics, there was the bubble chamber, which came on, I think, in the 70s. And so Berkeley, being in particle physics big time from the tradition of Lawrence and so on, had hired a bunch of bubble chamber guys, but the bubble chamber got replaced. And now you have all these people. So that's the problem, is that, can people actually transition, as usual in labor economics, from what they're doing now to doing AI, or to doing something that's AI driven? So that's a kind of food for thought.
Well, that's what capitalism is about, is old businesses entirely disappear, and it doesn't matter how good your buggy whips were.
Right. This is more on, what AI and other positions are you recruiting into? So I don't think this is less relevant. So that's basically the paper. I can put it back up, but to take the focus. This is like Agatha Christie. There's only 3 of us left. So we have to figure out which one of us has the gun or the knife.
I have mustard.
What's I reading about mustard? Yeah, so that's the material that I had. we have 15 minutes, or we can also cut it early, like I said, because now I'm gonna have this back-to-back meeting at
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go now.
5. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Take care, Martin. Have a good day.
Bye, Martin. Yeah, well, I actually have a paper to write, so maybe I'll cut it short. But City Research actually posted an interesting paper on use of AI in finance a couple of weeks ago. Have you seen that?
No, you said City Research, that's a public site?
I'll dig up the link and send it to you.
Okay.
It's I think it's quite a public. I mean, basically, City has this City Velocity, which is a public website where pretty much anybody can see the research, but you need to be logged in or some such nonsense.
Right.
So I'll send you the link. It's like
That's
it's
good.
really
Yeah.
public link, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I told you I had a bittersweet experience there where my boss never talked to me, but the people that I knew from former experiences, such as numerics, were very good. And so I got into, they had some nice meetings on, weekly quant talks where they brought together quant, the model val people. One of the talks was about a numerical method that the guy's name is Shapley. I think he received an economics or math Nobel Prize for applying game theory to some aspects of might have been the volatility surface that they were generally. Anyway, Shapley's a famous name in astronomy. That there was a great debate between Harlow and Shapley about what galaxies really were. Shapley ran the Harvard Astrophysics Observatory well before me, but he's so it was interesting that his son got into a similar area, that there were similar ideas.
Yes. The weekly seminar was awesome. For a few years, I actually helped. You mean the one that Lagbir Khairi founded, right?
I don't know. It's only there for 3 months, and I think in 22, but I thought it was great. I wish that I could continue to go to those even after the contract ended. So.
Yeah. So if it's a Wednesday seminar, yeah. So there was this very, very smart mortgage quant, Lagbir Khairi, who has retired some years ago, and he started the seminar. And then in the early 2000s, for a few years, I helped him run it until he completely retired. So I used to invite folks. We had Engel there, who was another Nobel Prize winner.
Great speaker. Great speaker.
Great speaker. We're talking about Arch and a bunch of other folks. So it was really cool. We actually tried to make it open to the public. So folks from academia would come, and we had a bunch of outside speakers. From what I heard, they still have the seminar weekly, but it's no longer open to the public, unfortunately. But they have fun folks. Yeah, it was No, there were a few positive things about City. Yeah, I understand. Yes, there's tremendous amount of turmoil there now. I mean, I still talk to those guys maybe once or twice a week because yes, I still have questions.
Yeah. I think I had some recruiters trying to place me in there as well. It's I spent I think a total of 7 years at JP Morgan at 2 different times, but only 3 months at Citi. So it seems like by mean reversion that at some point I'll spend a block of time there, but maybe the time isn't right.
No, I'm not going to. No, they tried to recruit me for a few things. Yeah. Right. My favorite story is that they question, Dmitry, do you miss Citigroup?
Right.
Hell no. Actual quote.
Right.
Yes. But yeah, I talked to them. Yeah, they had a bit of a meltdown with value at risk on Argentina positions.
I see.
Yeah.
But look, they have some very good people. I don't know if you know this guy Libatov, Andre. He's I met him with Columbia, and he's now he's at Wells, but he was he was in Long Island City for a while doing kind of back middle office stuff on the banking things and model risk. Very smart guy, Libatov.
Yeah, but no, them doesn't ring a bell. No, they had a few, interesting folks there. I mean, I used to report to Andy, Morton, who is obviously famous for his model. Yeah, so they have some smart folks, but yeah,
Right.
politically it's yeah, they kind of had a phase up until a few weeks ago where people were getting fired for not being Chinese, literally. And then right now they're in a phase of firing people for being Chinese.
Oh, boy.
It's not a good way to run any organization.
No, that's not good. I mean, there was this very racist, openly racist song that came out in the pop song, I think it was in the 80s, called Turning Japanese, when people felt that, the Japanese were taking over the real estate market in the US, until someone pointed out that the largest foreign investor in the US at that point was the UK. But because the UK doesn't have eyes that look like this, then, they must be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, city is a little bit worse with this ethnic cleansing stuff than some other banks. Yeah, they had, after Luckbeer retired, they basically fired some very good people, literally just for being, Indian.
Right.
They felt there were Indians around. That wasn't very nice.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you've seen this. The banks say things like, they'll, in the interview process, they'll say, okay, well, you did the first round. Now, when you come in for the second round, we're going to throw a Russian at you, which is basically saying we're going to throw a Jew at you, right? So, it's sort of thinly veiled. We have a smart person, but he's only really useful for weeding people out. We keep the Jew in a cage like a lion.
Yes, that reminds me of many years ago, I interviewed with Susquehanna, SIG, if you remember those guys.
No, but yeah, good. Yeah.
It's a hedge fund in Philadelphia.
Sounds like a hedge fund.
Yes. And well, basically, I wasn't interested in the first place because that would mean physically relocating to Philadelphia.
Right.
Which kind of I was reluctant to do, but I figured, okay, I'll talk to these guys. So they threw this Russian fellow, Jewish fellow named Sevam at me, who evidently did not like me much.
Right. Well, but that's also European. The fact that I work for the English and some other people that like Americans write great recommendations, no matter even if you're a Nobel laureate, you would write a good recommendation for a junior student. Whereas English tradition, I mean, I got a letter back from a distinguished guy at Trinity College, Cambridge once, not Hawking, but someone of that stature, when I asked for a summer job, and he said, "We are more than a little bit doubtful that you could succeed here." It's like, you really say that to a 20-year-old who's coming up in physics? I mean, that's just horrible.
Not nice. Yeah, but yeah, that's the way those Europeans.
So Russian being European and being in that tradition of, where all the, or they say like, and if you have that list of things at the end of recommendation, it'll say, is this guy good? Is he very good? Is he excellent? Is he one of the best people you've met in your career? And an experimentalist, or let's say someone with an American kind of democratic mentality, will make him a very good or a good. Whereas the theorist or the European say, well, look at that and say, one of the best in my career. Well, but I'm the best in my career. This guy's a nothing. He's bad. So kind of the tyranny of European thought.
Interesting. Yeah. Fun stuff to train AI on. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, like you said, you have a paper.
Okay, let me get back to writing my stuff because I'm behind on the various deadlines too. Okay, so thank you so much. See you all next week.